Okay, so here we go again. Steve Snodgrass here with the truth about ufology, a presentation that would have been given at the 5th Annual UNO UFO Symposium if it were not postponed. Fortunately, through the magic of YouTube, here it is. Now, credit where credit is due, I will attribute the subtitle of this presentation to the ones who egged me on to do it, Mr. John Powers and Mr. Kyle Finley. They both had suggested that through my tricksterish ways that the truth of ufology I would share will not likely make anyone happy, UFO ET believer or not, but that I should share the truth as I see it anyway. Now, just like I'm speaking at a pharmacological convention, I need to get these two disclaimers out of the way. I warn the viewer that my latest view is biased, to this way of looking at the world. From an article posted by J.V. Wallach as he hypothesized about the nature of sensory processing and the role of the endogenous God molecule, known as dimethyltryptamine or DMT, Wallach concludes, waking reality can be thought of as a tightly regulated psychedelic experience. In other words, I think there's good reason to believe we are in the Matrix. Secondly, I warn the viewer by way of this gutsy statement, reflecting my expertise and the relative originality of my ideas here. I share Ludwig Wittgenstein's sentiment in his preface to the Tractatus. How far my efforts agree with those of other philosophers, I will not decide. Indeed, what I have written here makes no claim to novelty in points of detail, and therefore I give no sources, except here and there at the upper right-hand corner, because it is indifferent to me whether what I have thought already has been thought before me by another. Now, over the last couple months, I've dreamt of backing into things with my minivan, which I've done 3 times in a row now in waking reality. And backing into this presentation is possibly what I seem to have done here with this talk. It started about a month ago on our January 31st and February 7th, 2014 web streaming radio shows, where I made my own UFO disclosure, that I was losing interest again in the UFO ET phenomenon altogether, just as I had done so twice before. After 3 years of exploration before the internet, mind you, I gave up. Then I came back for a while from 1990 to 1994, leading me wherever MUFON and the investigators of notoriety would take me, like Linda Moulton Howe, Stanton Friedman, and Bud Hopkins. Now, finding everything interesting but nothing ultimately compelling, I completely lost interest for 16 years, only watching Larry King's broadcasts with passing interest and seeing nothing really new on the scene. In 2010, I returned with a vengeance, armed with new knowledge about ways we experience the world. I blew the lid off ufology and got big in France and exopolitics with my first work, Integral Ufology, where I proposed a more reliable method for validating UFO ET encounters. The following 2 years, I dove deeper into what or who aliens might be, and established the UFO ET hypothesis as not only possible, but at least plausible. Still, we are left with all these camera phones and nothing to show for it, except the idea UFOs just got much better at hiding from us. So last year in 2013, I probably foreshadowed my eventual falling out with ufology for a 3rd time by promising what should be the end of ufology: the helpless, hopeless, and hapless dissolving of the field into a futile endeavor. So this year, I return to where I started: Shirley MacLaine. In deciding to juice up my interest by returning to MacLaine, here's what I found, of course. In her last best treatment of the subject, Ms. MacLaine lays out a tour de force of what she considers best evidence of all the mysteries yet unsolved. From Philip Corso and Harry Truman, to Eisenhower, Charles Suggs, and MJ-12, to the witnesses of Ike's meeting with ETs, Nathan Twining, Don Phillips, and the notorious Michael Wolff. From Roswell, of course, Ronald Reagan's sighting he shared at a party with Lucille Ball, and Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton's stonewalled efforts. to the likes of the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, the incredible travels of Billy Meier, his friends Lee and Britt Elders, and the keeper and loser of the strange metal fragments Marcel Vogels, to Shirley MacLaine's channeler Kevin Ryerson. From the Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell to MacLaine's friend Dennis Kucinich, who saw his triangular UFO craft outside her home, to the Bible Code, Canadian Defense Minister Paul Hellyer, John Maynard's claims of intentional disinformation, and finally to the entity Semjase, with whom Billy Meier traveled the universe and met the Pleiadians, and the always reliable John Mack. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and I deeply appreciate Shirley MacLaine for taking the time to lay it out. I respect her greatly. But I see nothing new here again. I saw nothing new here again. Just a retelling of the same stories from mostly the same people, woven like a bowl of spaghetti. You know what? I'm done. I'm out again. And after listening to 40 hours of Billy Meier's journeys just to be sure I didn't miss anything, I am sad to report that the truth of ufology is that the truth is not likely out there for me. And yet I'm still here. I can't let it go. You want to know why? Because it still would be the greatest discovery in all of history. So, just as a quick recap, here's how I backed up into things last year in the end of ufology. I established that the truth of the UFO ET phenomenon was so elusive that, quote, we will not arrive at a satisfactory explanation of it until we understand three simple things: cosmology and how matter came into the universe from nothing, how self-organizing and self-replicating life somehow emerged from this lifeless matter, and how conscious experience arose from matter and other life forms, as far as we know, of which are unconscious. Now, especially important is that our methodology could not or should not be based on taking mind-altering or mind-expanding drugs. If I can't find the truth au naturel without taking drugs, then I'm out. In other words, if we were to agree that our universe of matter, life, and conscious experience are the minimal things we would have in common with ETs and the technology they use, then we would need to understand these things before we can hope to understand these things. Now let me tell you that here in Omaha, we don't give up so easily. On our streaming radio show, we have continued to try and make sense of things by exploring various topics that might give us a clue as to what the nature of reality is, such as these topics. What do we mean by dimensions? What do we know about mass hysteria and the placebo effect? What are these claims of near-death and between-life experiences all about? And of course, addressing the very latest in end-of-the-world claims, most recently the Ragnarok, the blowing of the horn in Scandinavia that signified the Viking calendar end of the world. We do all of this dialogue with these three taglines: keep looking up, it's not the destination, it's the journey, and we try to suck a little less every week with our efforts. Now, I've discovered there are two themes or methodologies used to approach the truth about things, which form the core of my thesis in this presentation. These two ways of discovery tend to be the most contentious and have served to divide up many UFO ET groups here and around the world. In keeping with the idea of working backwards, what I'd like to do here is back up again even further to say that we need to understand this before we understand these things. But in order to understand these things, we need to back up yet again and consider these two approaches to the truth: mysticism and science. In other words, who should we listen to about matter, life, and conscious experience? This guy? Carl Sagan? Or this guy? The Dalai Lama? This guy? Richard Dawkins? Or this guy? Deepak Chopra? This guy? Neil deGrasse Tyson? Or this guy, Rupert Sheldrake. This guy, Richard Feynman. Or this guy, Terence McKenna. Or this guy, Stephen Hawking. Or this guy, Roger Penrose. Or maybe this guy, the physicist David Bohm. Or this guy, the Indian mystic J. Krishnamurti. Both and neither is the answer. And no, not just because these all happen to be men. I want to know who are the clearest thinkers who represent mysticism and science. And it's especially good to listen to them hash it out in direct, exploratory, non-argumentative dialogue, which both Bohm and Krishnamurti did in over 30 dialogues over the course of almost 25 years. I find those dialogues very revealing. Here's what I found out in my investigation of these dialogues, as well as our conversations on the topic of genuine inquiry. This is the theme of this presentation. I'm here to tell you that science and mysticism have a great deal in common. In fact, these two approaches have fundamentally the same things in common, to the point it is now hard for me to miss. First, they both have the same strategy: seeking by way of wondering, asking questions and designing injunctions or experiments to replicate a discovery, doing so with wonder. The scientist poses hypotheses and conducts experiments. The mystic also asks us to perform experiments by way of injunctions in the form of pointing out instructions. Second, they have the same goal. For a scientist, it is the moment of discovery, or eureka. For the mystic, it is a similar experience known as awakening or partial enlightenment on the way to full enlightenment. Now this, third, is the problem they share. They both encounter interference. For the scientist, we call these confounds, working within accepted paradigms, constantly finding anomalies, creating theories, boxing people into specializations, and having an agreed-upon practice known as the scientific method. For the mystic, these are called desires, attachments, projections, introjections, and spiritual instruction occurs by way of specializations and accepted practices, dharma, related to self-examination. Science has noise in the data that suggests the full picture remains incomplete. Mysticism has self wound up in the experience, constantly creeping into every observation we can make. In science, we hope for complete objectivity on the part of the experimenter. In mysticism, we are looking for the pure witnessing of that which is occurring from moment to moment. Skepticism I underline, and wonder on this page. In other words, our hope, our search for a particular outcome of the truth is something that can lead us to fudge the data as we strive to achieve a sense of equanimity or impartial observation of the results. In other words, both science and mysticism are fueled by skepticism and wonder. Now, a much easier way of explaining how this works is captured in the 38th special lyric. Just hold on loosely, but don't let it go. If you cling too tightly, you're going to lose control. We should pose our wondrous questions seriously, but not so seriously that we cling so tightly to the result that it contaminates it. Or the eagles take it easy. Don't let the sound of your own wheels, that is, your desire to make a discovery, drive you so crazy that you taint the results. Listen up while you can to the results. In fact, don't even try to understand the results. Just find a place to make your impartial, skeptical stand as you see the results of your experiment, and take it easy. Well, that's basically my thesis and my suggestion, but I'd like to go over a brief sidebar of information about this apparatus known as the human brain we are dealing with. Because there are at least 4 problems that both science and mysticism illustrate. The human brain appears to be a network of networks, 86 billion neurons, each of which has 1,000 to 10,000 synapses. The Human Connectome project, which is designed to map out all of these networks, would seem to be a good place to start. But so far, even the complete mapping of the 302 neurons in a roundworm hasn't told us the answer. The four problems are multiscales, that is, small-scale connections versus large-scale, the fact that the brain is always changing and learning new things, known as plasticity, and the fact that there is no such thing as the human brain. They're all different. They're all unique. And last is this statement that describes how we can function quite well in the world, but this is not due to any permanent fixed structure in our brain. Unlike laptop computers or mobile devices, our functioning is not due to having the same solid-state mechanical components. In fact, new research is coming from neuroscience, suggesting a way of functioning in our body and brain that is just as strange to me as Einstein's spooky action at a distance notion, the one of entangled particles where all information in the universe seems to be stored everywhere else, somewhere, somehow in an interconnected way. We are finding that who we are seems to be a constantly changing set of habits. Rather than being a brain in a vat, we think and behave and remember things not in our brains, but in our entire bodies, more as a simulation of reality than a fixed reality. They're calling this embodied cognition or simulated cognition. Our plasticity suggests that the world we inhabit behaves much more like that in the Matrix, and we have good reason to believe that this is the case not just for us, but for other forms of life, taking, for example, the discovery that the synapse in our brains is the same as that of a mouse. And again, a reminder, we are all different. Some people might call UFO enthusiasts neuroatypicals as opposed to neurotypicals. This is going to be a new word coming down the road. Well, having said all that, I propose that whatever our preferred pill in the matrix we want to swallow as our methodology, mysticism, or science, that we ask the right questions, still fueled by wonder and skepticism. Given that we are trying to hold on loosely to our questions and taking it easy as we seek to answer them, can we escape the conditioning of this constantly changing set of habits we find ourselves in? Can we be unbiased and undo the burden of language and culture that tend to taint our investigation? As we desire to seek the truth, can we disentangle ourselves from that very desire itself to see the outcome that we want? That is, can we be free of all contamination on the inside and the outside as we watch the results of our scientific and mystical inquiry come in? And mostly, if this is possible, most people think it isn't, but if it is possible, how would you find out? Is there a way to find out if this is possible? To be absolutely and unconditionally free. Well, let's look at the two tools in our toolbox that we use. First, science, which I will call a fetish here, if we cling too tightly to it and don't take it easy. Let's not look at science as if it were an unbroken chain of progress, that somehow Democritus's belief we are made of atoms are the same kind of atoms we're looking at in modern particle physics, or that Giordano Bruno's view that there are many worlds and an infinite universe teeming with other life forms is somehow directly connected to exactly what Edwin Hubble discovered in an ever-expanding universe. No. Science is a herky-jerky affair of paradigms that get popular and are then overturned. Science is a story of who won and social dominance, very similar to that of political history, art, and the social sciences. Somehow, we've decided that simpler explanations are better for some intuitive reason that pleases us. If there's anything we've learned in science, it is that there are always anomalies in any discovery that indicate our understanding is incomplete. The scientific method is contaminated by, well, scientists, especially when they're running low on the fuel of wonder or skepticism. Our other tool, mysticism or spirituality, can also be described as a story of who won and social dominance, except the practices, when kept to ourselves, are relatively harmless. But when heaped upon others as the way to understand things and behave correctly, they become quite murderous. Now let's take the first definition of mysticism: a belief that union with or absorption into the deity or the absolute, or the spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect, may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender. Now take that definition as compared to mysticism as a belief characterized by self-delusion or dreamy confusion of thought, especially when based on the assumption of occult qualities or mysterious agencies. Now, the first one sounds like a scientific hypothesis worthy of investigation. The second one sounds like bad science, utterly empty on wonder and skepticism. Now, before you go pointing out how flawed and occultish mysticism can get, consider the basic method of logic used in science, known as induction. Jacques Panksepp, a pioneer on the field of neuroscience, says, "Science never has proof. It has evidence for one argument or another. Science digs down with its experiments to show us that matter behaves in tendencies or probabilities. When the probability is high, we call that something very special, a 5 sigma. Science talks about gravity as a force of attraction that attracts bodies of matter together. Yet we have just given that thing a name without really knowing what it is. Just calling it gravity doesn't explain much. Same thing for chemical bonds and how protein folding somehow determines whether a cell in a banana plant will become part of the banana meat or part of the skin. Somehow a cell knows what it is, where to go, and what to do. Now that sounds very occult. Science might as well use terms like the earth wanting to go down or fire wanting to go up as an explanation. Or take the theory of phlogiston, however you pronounce it, science. Phlogiston science, that science once offered us, as a fire-like element that gets released during combustion. The preferred explanation now is the term oxidation, that means to become combined chemically with oxygen. The first description we think of as ridiculous. The second is a huge advance in science that provides a much clearer description, but doesn't tell us why chemicals combine in the first place, just that they do. They somehow want to combine when you put them together. And they do combine in very particular ways. My point is there's a big difference between a description and an explanation. Still, science can take those descriptions and probabilities and make some very good predictions. We can describe matter in the periodic table and develop laws of motion. We can use science to ask better questions about how the world behaves. We can wrap them in paradigms and mathematically model all the variables we can think of. We can try our best to control for as much interference in our experiments and reduce experimenter bias and contamination. And yet we still have that nagging observation problem. Somehow at the subatomic level, our observation of particles results in them behaving in different ways. Science leaves us with a description of what happens and how things happen, with an excellent descriptive model of how the world seems to behave in probabilistic terms, but only if we get out of the way and hold on loosely and just take it easy with those conclusions. Now let's look at the predictive power in mysticism and spirituality. We have learned that the seeking self is somehow the problem, and that seeking the truth and believing the thoughts you think keeps you mired in illusion, an illusion that this you that witnesses things as they arise is actually separated from the thing you're observing. We get some advice from those who have investigated this and have said that the self will continue to show up and contaminate experience. For example, Ramana Maharshi said, "That which is not present in deep, dreamless sleep is not real." Or in some forms of Zen, we find that if an experience has a beginning or ending in time, it has no real substance compared to the only fact there is. We define a fact as that which is actually happening now. I've never heard a better definition of a fact. They have all sorts of schools and spiritual disciplines that have been refined over time, but some of which remain very reliable. So masters have given us some injunctions to experiment with as you explore the nature of the mind. They have you count your breaths for 20 minutes without losing track and ask you to see what happens. And boy, they are right. At a sigma 5 level of confidence, your thoughts just jump from one thing to another. And then they slow down, and then they kind of come in waves, but then eventually slow down to a point you are just experiencing what is actually happening without commenting on it. When you do that, you don't suffer as much. Your life becomes more peaceful, and you become able to really face all the things in which you are, all the ways in which you are screwed up. We have good reason to suggest that mysticism has health and wellness benefits too. Even if you don't run across the fundamental nature of reality, but again, just like science, only if you hold on loosely and take it easy, because spiritual practice can also unlock all the doors to all the monsters and demons in your closet. I'll come back to that. So, does science help? Well, there's no arguing that science cured us from bubonic plague here and landed us on the moon and has lengthened our lifespan by 40 years. But does science help us with these questions? I believe it does and that it can, but it is very difficult to face the results when the data in our experiment doesn't match our expectations. Science pretends it can master pure objectivity, but when your career and your family and your ego are on the line, it's very difficult to accept when the world doesn't behave the way you want it to. A good example of that is in medicine, when this dang placebo effect that helps patients improve keeps interfering with the drug or the surgery I'm trying to study. I mean, look at all the side effect warnings on prescription medication commercials these days. So what about mysticism? Does it help? Now, I just shared some of the beneficial effects of spiritual practice and alluded to how expectations have a strong influence on the outcome, known as the placebo effect or the nocebo effect. So I think it's fair to say that mysticism can help us answer these questions too, if not at least to point out how difficult it is. Now, I spoke of induction in science earlier, so here's an example of inducing a mental state. When you get angry, your heart rate and blood pressure go up. But do you know why you get angry? Now, if a child gets angry and they can tell us why, we think of that as a growing up process. For us adults, the most we tend to know is that we're angry, or who we're angry at, or what we're angry about. An honest way to explore such emotions would tend to reveal that anger is a secondary emotion, brought about by other emotions like these: fear, shame, embarrassment, hopelessness, or loss. I had a tough time coming up with a picture of loss, so I just took Michael Tyson taking a bite out of Evander Holyfield. What we discover is that if we can uncover and separate ourselves from our conditioning and our expectations, we can reduce our suffering by understanding it. In some ways, the goal is to make the subject, I am angry, into an object. I am noticing my anger. As in, anger, doesn't have me anymore. It is something the I is now noticing. When we do that, we have Freud's definition of psychoanalysis, where the it was, as in, I am not anger anymore, I am noticing anger, there the I shall become. Now, become something else. What are you then becoming? Well, the answer is something much closer to the truth of the matter. Namely, you're afraid, ashamed, embarrassed, feeling hopelessness or loss, and so on and so on. Psychology, by the way, has some interesting history behind it. From looking at emotions as something like steam that needs to be vented around the Industrial Revolution time, to behaviorism that looks like a mechanical explanation of stimulus and response. There are always anomalies in behavioral psychology that just don't work, such as why punching someone in the face might not make them angry. I thought about doing this at the presentation, actually, daring somebody to come up and punch me in the face and have everybody predict whether I'll be angry or not and see if I can win. But anyway, psychology and spiritual practice have been advanced with notions in cognitive psychology. That is, our thoughts and how we interpret things are a big part of the equation. The only evidence that I have to offer is this question: who would you rather try to help? This guy? Or one of these guys? But, as you might expect, there are plenty of potentially harmful side effects involved in self-examination. As Dr. Zaius said to Taylor, played by Charlton Heston in Planet of the Apes, you might not like what you find. And here what I refer to as you might not like what you find as you observe and do your self-examination. Now for this slide, I'll save these two videos for the live presentation. One is a video of John Mack on Oprah Winfrey and his patients, where I'd like you to take a look and see if you can observe without bias or contamination and try to get to the truth of the matter. The second is a selective attention test, which is quite interesting. What I'd like to close with is this. The truth of ufology is that there are entities out there. I mean, just look around the room. And there are agents out there too, who seek to do us harm. But they don't have to be the men in black. It's bad science and bad mysticism without the right fuel mixture of wonder and skepticism. Scientific approaches need to realize that mechanistic descriptions are not sufficient explanations, and fuzzy mystics aren't the problem. Science must approach tough questions in ufology that involve a temptation towards too much skepticism and not enough wonder. They need to hold on loosely and take it easy with their conclusions. So the next time you run across an angry, hardened skeptic with a science fetish, ask yourself, if that were me, how could I undo my bias and my contamination? Now, mystical approaches need to realize that although no one can falsify someone else's subjective experience, there are some unpleasant alternatives that might involve you, and that confused scientists are not the problem. Mystics must approach tough questions in ufology that often involve too much wonder and not enough skepticism. They also need to hold on loosely and take it easy with their conclusions. So, the next time you run across any angry, deluded mystic with a spirituality fetish, ask yourself, if that were me, how could I undo my bias and my contamination? Why? Well, because if we are inhabiting a universe of habits, where there is spooky action at a distance and plasticity in the matrix, it will be helpful for us to keep looking up. And as we struggle to get around in the world to relate to each other, it is good to remember for both mysticism and science that it's not the destination, it's the journey. So try to suck at this a little less each week And might I propose, hold on loosely and take it easy. Thank you very much for your attention. Additional contact information is at the bottom of your screen. Bye-bye for now.